Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Voter ID is our topic today. You can join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by John Finnerty from Capitolwire. The governor has on his desk a bill concerning the use of a handheld cell phone while driving. John, what does it do?
Yeah, well, this Senate Bill 37, which passed both chambers last week, basically closes a lot of loopholes. We've had a texting while driving ban for I guess since 2012, but obviously over the last 13 or 12 years anyway, a lot has changed. There's a lot of different ways you can use smartphones and a lot of ways you can talk on your phone and things like that, that the texting while driving ban just hasn't covered. So it basically just says, you can't use a handheld device at all while driving now. And if you do, it would be a $50 fine. And basically, safety advocates say this is really necessary because distracted driving is, I guess, what they say is really the second leading cause of accidents. The only thing that causes more accidents in Pennsylvania is speeding. Each of the last 2 years, there's been more than 11,000 crashes that they blame on distracted driving. Last year, PennDOT says 65 people were killed in distracted driving crashes. So it's just really a problem that I think they really want to try to tackle.
John, the cell phone, of course, does several things. Does the bill go beyond the activity of talking on the handheld cell phone?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically anything you would do with a phone would be covered by that. And I think that was really the problem they were trying to resolve, is that there's, people could be now are, TikToking and FaceTiming and using Facebook Messenger, and all these things weren't covered by the texting while driving ban.
Now, what about GPS? That's covered as well?
Yeah, I mean, as far as, again, with Bluetooth technology and things, there are ways with people, if you have a dashboard system where, your phone is connected to your dashboard, and you kind of hit a button and then you can kind of talk, or you can kind of look at your screen on the dashboard. I think that's still allowed. But if you're holding the phone in your hand and trying to, follow Waze, you're probably going to get whacked.
John, which lawmaker took the lead on this bill?
Yeah, it was prime sponsored by Senator Rosemary Brown up in Monroe County, and of course her connection to this comes that the family of Paul Miller, who was killed in a crash back in 2010 in Monroe County, has kind of led the charge in trying to get this bill passed. Eileen Miller, in particular, I guess Paul's mom, has lobbied extensively for this, and got Senator Brown on her side.
John, if the governor signs this bill, can a driver be pulled over for this offense alone?
Yeah, I believe they can. And again, it's a $50 fine, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but I guess if you got a ticket in Pennsylvania, you know that a $50 fine, when they attack everything else, is probably going to cost you $200. So you'll probably be in trouble.
So has the governor gone public with what his intentions are with regard to this bill?
Yes, the governor has indicated he will sign it. Again, we are kind of we're saying it's on his desk, but technically it's not. That has been signed in the House and the Senate, so we got to wait for the Senate to come back and put their stamp on it. Then it'll get to him. If he signs it, then there's 12 months, and then it'll take effect.
Now, Governor Shapiro has some history with this cause because he used to be in the legislature, of course. So his concerns about this date back many years.
Yes, and I think there's some coverage that's indicated that he had sponsored legislation that would have done this back when he was in the state house. But times have changed. Even now, I mean, you look at the bill passed, but there were still 74 people who voted against it. And I think it kind of snuck up on some of us because I'm not sure everyone really expected the state house would go along with this type of things. So a lot of things kind of died there, but it got through this time.
John, what about other states? Are they making similar efforts?
Oh yeah, the numbers seem to. I'm seeing varying numbers depending on who's counting, but upwards of 27 states have pretty much the identical bills or laws in place, and most of our neighboring states. And I think that was one of the things that Senator Brown had pointed out. If you were in the Poconos, as soon as you cross the border in New York, this law, it's illegal to do this, and so people wondered why doesn't Pennsylvania have this law in place?
Last question, John. After the governor signs this bill, how soon will it take effect?
yeah, there's going to be a 12-month kind of waiting period while they adjust and they give warnings and things before you start getting tickets.
All right, thank you very much, John Finnerty from Capitolwire.
Thank you.
More PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Representative Brad Roae, Republican from Crawford County, and the minority chairman of the House State Government Committee, and Representative Joe Webster, Democrat from Montgomery County. Representative Webster, start us off. Right now we have limited voter ID in Pennsylvania. How does it work?
Right. So good morning, Larry, and to all the viewers. Thanks for having me on. I'd like to talk about voting in general, and then specifically the voter ID as we get going on this discussion this morning. Because I think the value part of why this is special, why living in the United States in a democratic republic is a special part of our history. And the idea of one person, one vote is what leads us to end up talking about how do you identify that one person. And the other sort of underlying foundations of that idea is we want in our government, we say by the people and for the people. We want to know the will of the people. And the way we do that is by voting. And the way that becomes the will of the people is that higher voting numbers, higher turnout is better than lower ones. And that for me is the underlying value here. If 70% of the voters vote, we know the will of the people. If 18% of the voters vote, we may have a decision, but we don't really know, is that the will of the people? And politicians make all kinds of statements about that. So the basic voting infrastructure in that regard for identifying a voter is that you have to have sort of all your documents in order when you register to vote. So your ID is checked and your identity is verified, and you become a qualified voter. And then in Pennsylvania, the first time you vote, you also have to show your ID at the precinct. So you've sort of been checked in. And then after that, you don't. So you're in the system, you're a qualified voter. And in Pennsylvania and in the United States of America, you then have all the rights and privileges of a qualified voter.
So Representative Roae, under two scenarios, you have to show your ID in order to vote. And that's the first time you're voting or the first time you're visiting a specific precinct. What do you think of that system?
That's good on that day, but it really should be every time you vote. The first time I voted was about 40 years ago. I haven't had to show an ID since. You need an ID for everything else. Anytime somebody gets a job, they sign up for welfare, they sign up for disability, they fly on a plane, they rent a hotel room, they sign out a library book, a lot of convenience stores make you show ID. If you want to buy a lottery ticket, I mean, everybody has an ID. People often say, one person, one vote. Well, I always add one person, one vote each. We want to make sure each person's only voting one time. Without ID, it increases the chances that somebody could vote twice. As far as having to show the ID the first time you vote, if you think about how ridiculous it is, if your house burns down or you go through a divorce or anything like that, you get out of the military and you're back in civilian life, that very first time you vote, you have to have an ID. And that's probably when it's the hardest to have an ID.
And let's say you don't have an ID. What recourse do you have?
Well, you can always vote by provisional ballot and deal with the county election board later on that week. But the very first time you vote, after some significant situation has happened, you have to have an ID. But yet, a year later, when it should have been easier, you had a whole year at your new address. Right. You've been out of the military for a whole year. You've been divorced for a whole year. Whatever the situation is, you never have to show an ID again. Like I said, the last time I showed my ID was almost 40 years ago. And I just think it's important for election security that everybody is proven who they are before they vote.
Well, Representative Roae, tell me some more about that provisional ballot. In the event a first-time voter does not have an ID, is that something that can be completed on the premises and turned in? Follow through, if you would, on the provisional ballot.
Yeah, really, any reason. If anybody walks into a polling site and they say, I'm sorry, you're not on the list, you can't vote today, or if it's the first time voting there and you say, oh, I can't find my license, I must have left it at home, anything like that, all you have to do is ask for a provisional ballot. They separate it out, they put it in a separate envelope, and then you'll probably have to go to the voter services office that week and take your information there. And one by one, the election board, they go through the provisional ballots. It could be you registered to vote and there's a delay processing the paperwork, whatever the reason is. Nobody should ever leave a polling site without voting. And if they say you can't vote, make sure you ask for a provisional ballot.
Representative Webster, as you know, a lot of young people are delaying getting a driver's license, so sometimes obtaining an ID, a photo ID in the first place, can take some time.
That's, I think, a bigger point in all of this. And we're going to get into a lot of the details, sort of the infrastructure of voting. And as Chairman Roae was talking about provisional ballots and all that, imagine that you're in a precinct where 2,000 people are going to stand in line and vote. And you're going to have people going through that process. I think the indication and the motivation, especially for me as a legislator, is to make voting easier. And we can do that in 5 or 10 different ways. And the process that we're going through on some of the bills we've seen around voting ID is not intended to make it easier. It does make it harder. The analogies are very interesting, right? You go into a bar and you order a beer, they're going to check my ID, but they don't check it the second time if I drink 2, or if I take a 6-pack home, and they don't check my ID when I take one out of the refrigerator, right? You've identified yourself. You're part of the system. You don't keep going back to that routine unless there's a reason to doubt the security of the election. And I think that's the underlying discussion that plays out here at the political level. There are this semblance for, we can talk about all the different reasons of somehow trying to say our elections aren't secure in some way. And when we get into all those numbers, I'm sure that'll come up. It's a little bit of, a ridicule. Our elections are secure. We've not had any significant fraudulent cases since 1979. If you count all the numbers over time, even the Heritage Foundation admits.
Representative Roae, what'd you think of that scenario that Representative Webster described? You go into a bar, you show your ID for the first drink, but you don't show it for the second drink. Any comparison to be made here?
Well, people shouldn't be voting twice the same day, so I hope that wouldn't happen at a polling site. But if somebody was only 18 and they went into a bar, they looked like they were just barely 21, they would get carded.
Right.
If they went back to that same bar a day or a month or a year later, they would get carded again. So it's not really that good of an example. Or in my case, I voted when I was 18, and then 40 years later, I never have to show it again. Now, the thing with ID, very wide majorities of people, even Democrats, the majority of Democrats support voter ID. The majority of Republicans support voter ID. It's very widely recognized. And people have to remember, too, there's currently, last I heard, there's still one of the state house races that hasn't been finalized yet from the primary a couple weeks ago. There's a 3-vote separation between the 2 Republican candidates in the primary. 3 votes. So it would only take one mail-in ballot being improperly counted that shouldn't have counted, one person voting in somebody else's name, one person voting twice because there was no ID. It doesn't take much to change the outcome of an election. We have a state house member, Representative Ecker. He won his first race by 1 vote. 1. Bud Cook won his by 11 votes. So a lot of times people think of this in terms of, well, if some people vote and they're not really who they say they are, there's not going to be 20 or 30 or 40 or 50,000 people doing that swings the presidential election. Well, that's one race on the ballot. There's many, many, many races. And routinely in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of races that are literally a tie. Things like township supervisor, township auditor. Those are quite often ties. And they do coin tosses to decide those. So even if you have one voter voting, and it's not who it really is. That can impact an election.
Representative Webster, Representative Roae says your bar scenario doesn't hold up simply because a lot of time elapses between elections, often 2 years, not 15 minutes for a second drink and you're still a familiar face.
No, I think the point of the analogy is simply to discuss process and to discuss, are we determining whether or not the vote is secure and the eligible voters are there. And it is interesting when you talk about a primary and small numbers of cases, but I think for most Americans, the real concern is the discussion about our larger races, whether they're statewide or national races. And just this mantra over and over of are they secure or not, right? It's not that we expect that they're not secure. It's that we sort of are messaging things to create doubt. And that would be one more thing that creating a voter ID does. In fact, it depends on how academic you want to get or how much, numbers and cases that we want to talk to today. But if you think about even in 2016, when Texas implemented voter ID, right? Their voting rolls dropped significantly. People were very unsure about what IDs were accepted and what were, and it created turmoil and more doubt in the election rather than more confidence in the election. And especially today with the 2024 election, I think that would be a bigger concern. We shouldn't be creating doubt in the electorate. We should be making sure that they know Pennsylvania's elections are secure. And we can get into all those details as well.
Representative Roae, you're the Republican here, and House Republicans have a plan that would expand the current voter ID law, which you've already acknowledged, but do your best to explain that bill to us in any important details.
Okay, well, there's been numerous proposals over the years, but we do want to make it easy to vote, but we also want to make it harder to cheat. So,
is there a bill on the table right now?
Not that's going to be called up by the Democratic majority, but you have to either show a driver's license, a state ID card, a student ID card, a military ID card, something like that. And
so is there a list of official IDs that would be accepted?
There is. And here's the thing, too. Everybody has an ID. You have to be 18 to vote. Every 18-year-old, they should either A, they should have a job, and you need an ID to get a job, or B, if they're signing up for disability, if they have some kind of disability, you have to have an ID to sign up for disability. Or if you're joining the military, you have to have an ID to join the military. Every 18-year-old has an ID. So I don't want to hear that what if somebody's 18 and they want to vote and they don't have an ID. And plus, you need one the first time you vote anyway. So to say, well, if so you have to have an ID when you're 18, but what if you can't get an ID when you're 19? Well, any voter proposal that we've ever passed, Governor Wolf vetoed voter ID a couple years ago. You got a free ID card from the state. For people that don't drive, you had mentioned some people don't drive. Right. There's a thing called an identification card. When you look at it very quickly, it looks just like a driver's license, but on the top it says identification purposes only. Those are free under any legislation Republicans have ever offered. So if somebody doesn't have an ID, they can go to the PennDOT Driver's License Center and get one of those ID cards for free.
Now, gentlemen, without getting too technical about how things work in the House here, I understand there's something called a discharge resolution, which would accelerate calling up this bill. First of all, just in a general sense, what is a discharge resolution? Well,
what a discharge resolution is, it used to be a mechanism in the rules that if the majority party would the committee chair is the only person that can call up a bill, the majority chair. I'm the minority chair. I can't call up bills.
Right.
So when you do a discharge petition, you had to have it was either 25 or 50 people had to sign the petition, and that would basically pull that bill away from the committee out to the House floor to force a vote on it. Earlier in this session, the Democrats rewrote the rules where you have to have, I think it's 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans sign a discharge, which no Democrats are ever going to sign a discharge to force a bill up for a vote that the Democrat committee chair doesn't want to call up for a vote. So the House rule could easily be rewritten that discharges are no longer allowed. I filed a discharge for voter ID, and so far, one Democrat that's in a very tough district, re-election-wise, signed it. All the Republicans have signed it so far. We have one guy that's on military duty with the National Guard, so he's not able to sign. But everybody else has signed it, but there's only been one Democrat
So
that
if you
signed
don't
it.
sign it, that means you simply want the bill to go through the usual committee process. That doesn't sound bad.
Well, which means it's not going to go through the committee process.
Well, at least it isn't in a timely manner, as far as you're concerned.
Well, right.
In other words, it could sit in the committee longer.
Right. Well, actually, most bills don't go through state government. This whole session, we've only voted on 33 bills that actually did anything. We've had 52 resolutions that name things, naming different weeks, naming different months, different weeks, things like that. But as far as bills that actually do anything, there's only been 33. By comparison, last session, when Republicans had the majority, 121 bills were passed that actually did something. And then they also had 2 resolutions that didn't really do anything. But there's been 52 resolutions that basically do nothing other than feel good. This is Pet Your Dog Day, or this is just ridiculous stuff like that. And there has been a very major lack of movement from state government. Open record reform needs done. Campaign finance reform needs done. There's a lot of things that need done, and they're all pretty much stalled.
Well, Representative Webster, what do you think of this discharge resolution business and using this device to take a bill out of committee that the committee hasn't dealt with yet?
So, and this is a personal statement from Joe Webster. I absolutely think there's a number of things that should have been done 20 years ago and 15 years ago and 10 years ago and 5 years ago when there were Republican majorities that we should do today to enable the minority party in the House of Representatives to be able to call some bills up. And there's a number of those things that occur if you're in the legislature in Colorado or Oregon or different legislatures from Pennsylvania where the minority party has more rights than they do in Pennsylvania. And so this is just Joe Webster, good government kind of statement. It's not about the politics of it at all. But I would agree with Chairman Roae that there should be ways for the minority party to enable bills of special value, or even if it was 1 or 2 per committee or whatever the rule is, to say this bill deserves a vote, and you can't just pigeonhole it. And I would be in favor of that personally. In the big picture.
And this particular...
That's something Pennsylvania government needs to do eventually. And we would go through a long list of bills that are stuck in committee for the past 15 years if we were analyzing that process.
And as the discharge resolution applies to the voter ID bill, well, it sounds like you're on a timetable. We have an election in November.
Yeah, it's very complicated to amend the Constitution of Pennsylvania. We have to pass a resolution in the House and Senate. The next 2-year session, we have to pass the same resolution again. Then it has to be advertised statewide.
So even if you voted on it today, it wouldn't be in effect for this November's election?
Well, it would be, because
I thought you said you needed to have 2 consecutive sessions.
Well, you do. We passed it before. In that last session, then we have to pass it this session.
Right.
And then, but the timeline is getting very, very close to pass it and advertise it statewide and get it on the ballot for this fall. We're very close to when.
I would have to say there's no way that Pennsylvania leadership in the House of Representatives is going to create instability in the upcoming election by changing the rules at this point.
I think it would be more stability.
That would be hazardous.
We have 10 million illegal aliens that have come into the country under President Biden. who knows if any of them are going to try to vote. There's more election security if we know for sure that everybody that votes, they show their ID. Hey, this is me. I'm here to vote. That makes elections more secure.
So the whole security issue is really such a red herring, and maybe we just have to address that directly. So in 2022, the Heritage Foundation did that big thing, 10,000 or 10 million immigrants. Immigrants aren't voting, and we have to be ridiculous about that statement. They have found literally maybe 1,499 cases of a fraudulent voter since 1979. And if you do the math real quick, that's 33 or 34 a year. And so this whole discussion designed to give people a little discomfort about the result of the election is the messaging. And that's really not what voter ID is about. That's really not what the voting mechanism or the infrastructure in voting is about. We have secure elections. There is no indication that whether it was the 2016 election or the 2020 election, that there were fraudulent votes that changed the result of the election. In fact, it's remarkable if you think about the way we do that election, because when I go to vote, right, if somebody wanted to go to the same precinct, you have to figure out what precinct, and vote as somebody else, the likelihood that then I come in and try to vote again is going to identify the fraudulent vote. In our scenario, it's very unlikely that you can vote in person or by mail and not get caught if you're trying to cheat. And I'll step back from this. The messaging around election security is actually daunting and uncomfortable when you want a secure election, when you want the people of the United States to be comfortable with the result that's tallied up. And we keep creating artificial messaging that they're not secure when in fact they are. And I'd like to give people in Pennsylvania a lot of comfort about that, because wherever you are, Luzerne County, Sullivan County, Washington County, I live in Montgomery County, when you go to vote, your vote is sacrosanct, and it's not likely that anybody else can vote in your place because they're going to get caught. And that's what happens when you see the ones and twos and the sixes. But when you hear people say big numbers about election fraud or voting, remember, and we did this in the state government committee when there was a Republican majority after the 2020 election, we sat through 32, I counted them, 32 hearings in the state government commission about voter security and voting security. And the best answer came from the election services officer, a Republican from Arizona. And she said, be very careful. People are throwing around big numbers, but nobody will use those numbers under oath in a court of law.
Representative Webster.
Those numbers were not accurate.
Representative Webster and Representative Roae, take a break just for a minute, because we're going to look at program notes for PCN. On the issues has Representative Natalie Mihalik telling us about her bill that bans artificial dyes in food. She'll be here on Wednesday at 7 p.m. And she's followed by Pennsylvania's Secretary of Labor and Industry, Nancy Walker, at 7:30 p.m. Journalist Roundtable on Thursday has Julia Taruso from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Stephen Caruso from Spotlight, PA, and Kristen Smith from the Center Square. They're on Thursday at 7 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Okay, gentlemen, we've been talking about voter ID and the possibility of having a bill go through that would require people to show ID every time they vote. So let's consider, we've heard it from the legislative point of view. How does the public feel about voter ID? Representative Roae.
Well, overwhelmingly, the public supports it. They've done polling, national polling. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's like, 60% of Democrats and 95% of Republicans or something like that. So overall, it's,
a majority?
A very, 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 very high majority. And, I forgot to mention before, I would like to remind anybody attending the Democratic National Convention, make sure you take your ID there or you can't get on the convention floor. It's kind of ironic that the Democratic National Convention mandates ID to get on the convention floor when they're voting on the nominee, but the Democrats are against showing ID when the rest of us vote. So it's kind of weird, but the public overwhelmingly supports ID to vote.
Representative Webster, what do you think of these numbers?
Yeah, so same question, wildly different answer, and it's not about the polling or the percentages. It's the fact that a particular demographics of the Democratic Party and Pennsylvania and the United States of America, that the whole ID issue is really, really sensitive to non-white Americans. And yes, they're not 60% of the population, but it's twice as likely that a non-white American will lack a photo ID. And I mean, if you really want to, the heartbreak or the sensational emotion of it is, are we really going to harken back to Jim Crow laws and have, are we continually putting things in front of people that make it harder to vote? And so that's why, you can have a polling number that says the population, I have an ID. It wouldn't be difficult for me. But there are a lot of people for whom it might be difficult, or for whom it's dramatically uncomfortable to say, we're going to reduce polling places. You're going to wait in line longer. You need an ID. We're going to eliminate drop boxes. We don't want the envelope, the date or the signature doesn't look right. And all the different things that intimidate voters. And this is just one more that would have the result of impacting turnout, having less voters rather than more voters.
Gentlemen, let's consider voter ID within a larger context. And by that, I mean election integrity. And I have a poll handy from Muhlenberg College. They say 1 in 4 PA voters have doubts about Joe Biden winning the 2020 election. Representative Roae, tell us briefly, why does that belief persist?
Well, a lot of things were handled very poorly in the last election. The mail-in ballots put a lot of distrust into things because of how the vote totals that were coming in. Some counties reported the mail-in voting after their election day voting, so the numbers were kind of skewed as they were coming in. Now this year it's actually going to be worse. The bill we passed in the state government committee actually allows counties to stop counting mail-in ballots. Under the current law, counties, once they start counting mail-in ballots to qualify for their election integrity grant, they're not allowed to stop until they're done. Under the law we just passed, the legislation we just passed out of state government a couple weeks ago and out of the House last week, it allows counties to stop counting their mail-in ballots before they're done counting, and they can still get their election integrity grant. That was in the bill with the pre-canvassing being extended 7 days before the election. But anyways, things like that really throw doubts into the election, because on election night, currently all the counties are getting everything done. The last couple years, all the counties have automatic letter opener machines that take the paper out, and everybody's getting done on election night. Well, can you imagine this fall if it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days after the election and some counties still have not counted all their ballots and they still get their election integrity grant, which was designed to make sure counties can quickly get their results out. But when you have things happening, when you have court rulings, Department of State rulings saying things like, well, even though the law says a mail-in ballot must be at the voter services office by 8 o'clock on election night, when you have unconstitutional rulings, in my opinion, saying, yeah, they can get there 3 days late, and we're still going to count them. Nothing in the election law allows for drop boxes. It's not in the election code. Some counties just randomly decide to start having these, they're called mail-in ballots. There's no such thing as a drop box ballot. Yet people mishandling ballots. Governor Wolf illegally took his wife's ballot. The law says you can only handle your own mail-in ballot. Governor Wolf took his wife's ballot and took it to, deliver it to the courthouse. Well, how many other people did that? And did somebody fill out somebody else's ballot and then take it there? I'm not saying the governor did that, but if you can walk into the county courthouse with more than one ballot, what's the how do you know how secure those are? So there's a lot of things, and Representative Webster mentioned it. Things like the envelopes. Well, I think following the state law on elections increases the comfort level in elections. The state law clearly says a mail-in ballot must be in the secrecy envelope. Our PA Constitution mandates secrecy in elections. The state law says you have to sign the return envelope. Well, the election workers, they look at that return envelope, they look at the voter registration, make sure it's the same person. So when people say, well, we should just skip all that stuff. No, we can't skip it.
Representative Webster, go ahead. A lot of concerns here.
You just heard the answer to your question. Why do people feel that our elections were less secure? It's because Republican leadership is telling them over and over that it might be less secure, that there might have been a concern that people put the wrong date on the envelope, et cetera. And none of that has to do with certifying an election. And none of that has to do with the primary responsibility of election services, and that is to make sure if you're a qualified voter, your vote counts. So there are all kinds of court cases as a result, most of them designed to limit the vote count, not to count votes that were cast with where the intent of the voter is very, very clear. Like the whole secrecy envelope thing is a process. But that process doesn't determine the validity of the ballot that's inside the envelope. That was the discussion. The courts came to the decision that if you wrote your birth date on the envelope instead of the day
you filled it out,
did that mean you don't know how to vote, or that your vote should not count? The courts ruled the vote should count because the intent of the voter was clear. The voter was qualified to vote. So in the United States of America, why would you disenfranchise that vote? And that's what's playing out here. We're messaging around, we're not sure if the votes were right when they were. For what purpose? Why do we want people in the United States to think that the greatest democracy in the world doesn't know how to count votes? Because we do.
Representative Roae, I'm going to go back to you again, continuing our discussion about election integrity here. There's a group that monitors elections. It's a long name, I have to say it, the Election Infrastructure Government Coordinating Council. Now, more important is what they said about the election of 2020. They said it was the most secure election in history. Do you not buy into that?
Well, I don't agree with that. When you have elections administered in a way that does not follow the state law, that is not secure. Drop boxes are not in the state law. There is the PA Senate seat in Westmoreland County and Allegheny County that, Allegheny County violated the state law. Westmoreland followed the state law. That impacted the outcome of that state Senate race. You had situations where people were delivering more than one ballot, to the voter services office. I mean, there's all kinds of things. You have the Zuckerberg money that, was given to the state, and the state gave 90% of the money to Democratic counties to get out the vote efforts, to artificially raise.
They gave it to the most populous areas because that's where it's most difficult to measure the election and have skilled staff.
And I thought I was speaking now, but
I know. But
The money was given. The money was given to the 90% of it to the Democratic.
Hold on, Representative Webster. We're going to give you plenty of time. Our time is limited, Representative Roae. Try to wrap it up in 10 seconds.
No, it's important to say that the money, you have a liberal billionaire donating a lot of money to the state, and the state gave that to counties, Democratic counties, 90% of it, to drive get out the vote efforts to get a higher percentage of Democratic areas to vote.
Okay, Representative Webster, you have the floor.
So, again, good government statement, and I would hope Chairman Roae would agree with me. There are 10 or 15 things we can do to eliminate dark money from billionaires, to make sure that if we're registering voters, we know who the people are and how that process is going, to fund our counties' election services so that they're all operating at the same level. He's mentioned a couple of times that drop boxes aren't in the law, then you're. I remember this from my time in the Air Force, right? You say, okay, there's nobody says we can or nobody says we can't. So what do? And at that point, you do the best you can to make sure that in this case, voters have access to polling. Those drop boxes, in all cases, had 24-hour security. They're only picked up or emptied by people who've sworn an oath to the election services and to the Pennsylvania Constitution and the law. And in the end, they get counted. If in fact a person was trying to vote for 3 different people, we're going to find out about that, because those people also have the opportunity to vote. And especially for 2024 coming up, when we're talking about an election that includes the President of the United States, we're going to have enormous turnout. And statistically, if 60% or so of the populace is going to turn out to vote, then it's completely nonsensical to think that any one person can vote for 2 or 3, because they're going to get caught.
Gentlemen, then, as we get closer to the end of our program, let's consider the possibility of this discharge resolution, which we discussed before, accelerating a voter ID bill and having action on it. So is there any way to anticipate if anything will happen in the coming weeks that will take effect for the November election then, if voter ID goes through, which means showing an ID every time you vote?
Well, I'm pretty pessimistic, since only one of the 102 Democrats have signed the discharge. What that tells me is there's 101 Democrats that do not want the voter ID law to pass.
Has that deadline come and gone to sign the discharge resolution?
Well, we're very close. It's very complicated. You have to advertise constitutional amendments in the newspaper, and there's different deadlines. Counties have to have time to print their ballots, and it's a very complicated process. We're getting down within a few days, I think, of when we could actually do it. Now, one thing on the drop boxes I do want to point out, drop boxes are not secure. Republicans, in the bill the governor vetoed, we did want drop boxes to be secured. We wanted 24-hour-a-day surveillance, but that's not the case. Some counties are doing that, others aren't.
Have some been removed?
I think some counties initially had them. Now, the representative was saying that the law doesn't say you can or cannot do it. Well, in theory, you could have Dollar General boxes. There's Dollar Generals all over the place. Some county could decide to let Dollar General collect ballots. The law doesn't say you can't do that. It doesn't say you can do that. So it's just ridiculous. They're called mail-in ballots. They're not called drop box ballots. And people need to take responsibility. Voters that want to vote by mail, they have to apply early enough in the process. We're still, almost 5 or 6 months away from the election. Anybody that wanted to could apply today for a ballot, and they could fill it out and they could mail it back. They don't have to wait until 2 days before the election and then say, this isn't fair. I need a drop box.
Representative Webster, how satisfied are you with the security of drop boxes in general?
So we have had no court case, no prosecution that has found fraudulent mail-in ballots through whether it was Dropbox or the U.S. postal system, and so especially as we're trying to wrap up here, I really do want to make sure that anyone who's watching in Pennsylvania needs to understand that while there's a whole lot of words at play that are intended to make people feel uncomfortable about the result of the elections in Pennsylvania are very secure, and we have not had voter fraud. What we've had is increased responsibility and increased voter awareness, and it's dramatic. With then the result of an election that we can actually be confident in. I think on this issue and a number of other ones that compromise is possible in the future. To create a universal ID, to have a wide range of IDs that might be easy to verify, and I would do a whole bunch of other things like universal mail-in balloting or a larger voting window. Like, why do we only vote on one day a year, et cetera? There's a whole bunch of considerations that are possible, but what you really don't want to do is create that additional instability before the 2024 election. What you want now is for people to understand our process is in place. We've done it for 150 years or 250 years coming up in Pennsylvania. We know how to count ballots, and the tallies and the results at the end are verifiable. Voting in Pennsylvania is secure.
Gentlemen, we have about 4 minutes left in our show. Let's just change the subject over to the state budget. And Representative Webster, I understand you have grants coming in for school districts, and take about a minute and tell us what they pay for.
So specific grants, the big issue in the budget is increased funding for public education.
Right.
And
what would it
that's what
cover?
you're
Can you
referring
say,
to.
Representative Webster? Does that have to do with security or safety?
You're speaking specifically to a bill that I've
Well, no,
written.
not a bill, but I understand that some grants are coming in that your school districts can take advantage of. I'm just trying to find out what they pay for, or put it this way, Representative, what they should pay for.
Yeah, so I go back and forth on this because I didn't have to go to a school that was secured, like an airport or a government building or worse, right? We're in a different time, but the grants that are available today are about lighting, and they're about security cameras and in some cases bulletproof glass and other security strategies that can be implemented in existing buildings and existing school districts.
Representative Roae, what stands out to you? Our show's almost over. Representative Roae, I want to give you a minute to comment on the governor's budget, good or bad.
Yeah, Governor Shapiro and the Democrats, they want to spend $3.5 billion more than we're going to take in the new fiscal year. If you do that 2 years in a row, you just wiped out the entire surplus. So Democrats should be talking about what tax are we going to raise 3 years from now. You would still have the rainy day fund, but that can only be used for emergencies. It takes a 2/3 vote to access that money. But under this budget proposal, if the Democrats go along with it and pass it, we'll completely wipe out the reserve funds, and we're going to be looking at a sales tax. So the Democrats should be telling the people, 3 years from now, do you want to raise the sales tax, raise the personal income tax, or some other kind of tax? But the budget proposal spends way too much, and I certainly hope it doesn't pass because my constituents cannot afford a tax increase.
All right. Our guests have been Representative Brad Roae, Republican from Crawford County and the minority chairman of the House State Government Committee, and Representative Joe Webster, Democrat from Montgomery County. Thank you both.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Earlier, I taped an interview with Representative Jamie Flick about his bill that expands the use of cameras in Pennsylvania's courtrooms. Why do you support this idea?
Thanks for that question. I would throw out two key words, transparency and accountability. I've talked to a number of retired judges that support this. I've talked to a number of lawyers, attorneys that support it. And most of all, I have sent out surveys to my constituents in Union County and Lycoming County. And I know it's a small sampling size, Larry, but 30-some surveys have come back and only one in opposition to cameras in the courtroom. And that particular person believes there is no corruption that has ever occurred in the state of Pennsylvania. So I sort of discarded that, perhaps.
Well, how can cameras in the courtroom in general affect the results that take place there?
Yeah, I think even with some of my personal experiences and times that I've been in the courtroom, I'll just give you a simple example. So right now, without the cameras, and we're talking about the Court of Common Pleas, without those cameras in there, of course, you have court reporters. So they're the stenographers. And if you read the written word, if you get a copy of the transcript for a couple $100 and you read it, an example might be, well, geez, Larry, this is from a judge. A judge might say, Larry, you know what, Larry, you could have filed that appeal probably 6 months ago and you didn't, right? Simple enough. And you read that, very innocuous. However, if there's a camera in the courtroom and you see the judge say the exact same words, but he says it by standing up, his robe is filling, he is screaming at you, his arms are going all over the place, he's foaming at the mouth, that's intimidation. That's not being professional. And judges need to follow their canons, and they need to be professional. So it's sort of like you're getting a text. The context is not always what you might think it is. Make sense?
Now, before we go any farther, Representative, some of our viewers realize that PCN already has cameras in the appellate courtrooms
Sure.
in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of a handful of states that permits this. So tell us about the courtroom that you want to target for having cameras.
Yep, so these would be the 67 counties. And out of those 67 counties, I think a couple share. I think Wyoming and Sullivan, a couple
You mean
rural
local
counties.
municipal courts?
I'm talking about the Court of Common Pleas in the counties, right, the county courts. So those 65 different court systems within those 67 counties.
And why target that particular system?
I think that's where the average citizen goes. Yeah, that's where they end up in court. If they go there, of all things, probably custody battles. If you look at the dockets here in your county, if you look at Cumberland County, Perry County, Lehigh County, Lycoming County, all 67 of the counties, what you'll find is a very, very large number of divorce and custody that are appearing. And there's a high range of emotion in those, as you could imagine, in front of the judges.
And now that you mention emotion being present in the courtroom, as far as the appellate courts are concerned, there's no jury or witness present. And again, I refer to the court sessions that PCN has on the
Sure.
air.
Yeah, perfectly understood. So.
And as far as the appellate sessions, what do you think about, though, the concerns about privacy and intimidation of witnesses, even the safety of judges, if we shine this light, so to speak, on these courts?
Yeah, I think if you do some research on that, you're going to see, and we're very early in this stage of co-sponsorship, so I have not even introduced this as a bill yet. The first step is to collect co-sponsors, to talk to members of both sides of the aisle, which I've done. And at this point, I've had nothing but support. So early in June, I will introduce this as a bill. In the meantime, I'm going to keep working on getting different co-sponsors from different state reps. But as far as safety and concerns of that nature, there will be exceptions as we build this bill. We're not going to put cameras in the courtroom or have them filming children that are talking about sex abuse. So again, we're at step one. I know this process takes a long time, and we're open arms to hear everybody's thoughts. And we'll also study certainly other states. I believe Pennsylvania may be one of 5 or 6 states that doesn't have cameras in this particular court system.
Do you have any concerns personally about the courtroom sessions being on television or video and being perceived as entertainment?
I mean, we've been doing that, right? Back to Judge Judy. So that part is entertainment, certainly. But no, this is not for entertainment purposes. The courts are open, right? Open
It's
to the
not for
public.
entertainment purposes, but might it be perceived that way and given kind of a view that makes it seem less important, perhaps?
I don't believe so. I've been in court.
Also, there's performances, too. It could affect, literally, the performance of people in a courtroom.
Yeah, and that goes across the board, not just performances by pro se litigants or by defendants or plaintiffs, but certainly there's performances by judges. And I think, again, this goes back to accountability of everybody that's in that courtroom, not just the judges, but both attorneys, any witnesses, and the plaintiff and the defendant. So most of these cases are relatively boring. I don't think it would get a high rating from ABC or NBC or Fox News or CNN. So,
Does Pennsylvania's court system support your idea here, Representative?
I would say, again, of the limited number of judges that I've talked to, I've not presented this yet to the AOPC. I've talked to 1 or 2 members of the Senate Judiciary. I've talked to members of the Bar Association.
And what are the reasons they cite beyond the ones you've already given
Well,
us?
I think it is accountability. I think we have a very, very low threshold right now in Pennsylvania of trusting the Commonwealth, of trusting the government. I mean, you don't have to go back very far to see attorney generals putting prison in Pennsylvania. Obviously, we go back to the kids for cash. And I think with that, I think we might be touching on that in a bit, or if you want me to touch on it
let's talk about it right now, because we still have a minute or so left.
Okay.
First of all, what was the Cash for Kids scandal? Tell us briefly.
So that was in Lackawanna County. So briefly, 2 corrupt judges and members of the court were getting kickbacks to send juveniles to a private prison. This was maybe 15 years ago. It took 5 years to uncover, then longer yet, until justice was finally served.
And you maintain if cameras had been in the courtroom, the result might have been different?
I do think so, yes.
Tell us how.
Well, I just think if you look at some of those specific cases where a mother's in there with her juvenile child, and if they had that, again, going back to my example, that the transcript is really same words, but different if you see video and if you hear audio. And we might have been able to pick up something a little sooner that pointed us in the corruption direction, if you will.
And how soon might the legislature take this up, at least according to your hope?
Well, I mean, we have budget season coming up in June. Let's hope that's over quickly, but let's be real, it may not be. So once we get through that, I'm hoping it's taken up. But I will work, sort of behind the scenes, and that work that you put in off camera, per se, no pun intended, is very, very important. Working with other legislators from both bodies to really get momentum on this.
Representative Jamie Flick, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Before we go, here's a reminder for you. On the issues has Representative Natalie Mihalik telling us about her bill that bans artificial dyes in food. That's on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Then she's followed by Pennsylvania's Secretary of Labor and Industry, Nancy Walker, at 7:30 p.m. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Kasper. Thanks for watching.